For centuries, sailors trusted their lives to cloth stretched against wind, powerful enough to tear rigging from masts and drive ships onto rocks. Those sails were not made from lightweight synthetics or space-age fibres. They were made from tightly woven natural fabrics, primarily flax and hemp canvas, engineered through experience, earned the hard way. When modern sailors assume nylon automatically outperforms old sailcloth, they overlook a critical truth. Real storms do not reward lightness or flexibility alone. They reward materials that behave predictably under sustained stress, water saturation, abrasion, and time. What follows is not nostalgia. It is a technical examination of why traditional sailcloth repeatedly survives conditions that cause modern nylon sails, tarps, and covers to fail when storms stop being theoretical and start becoming prolonged, violent, and wet. Why historical sailmakers designed for survival rather than speed or convenience? So, back in the pre-industrial days, sailmakers worked in an environment where there was, well, no replacement supply, no rapid repair, and certainly no rescue if equipment failed. Every sail had to survive, multiple storms, not just one. Sailcloth was expected to stretch gradually, absorb shock loads, and importantly, remain functional even when damaged. This philosophy, really, it shaped the material itself. Old sailcloth was woven dense, heavy and stiff, with fibres chosen for how they behaved when soaked, strained and battered by salt and wind. Modern nylon, by contrast, is optimized for weight savings, ease of handling and short-term performance. Nylon performs extremely well under controlled loads, but it degrades a lot faster when subjected to chaotic, repetitive stress over long durations. Why does fibre structure matter more than the advertised tensile strength? Well, on paper, nylon often shows higher tensile strength than hemp or flax. But in practice, storms just don't apply steady, uniform force. Instead, they deliver shock loads, flapping cycles, and sudden pressure spikes. Natural fibres really excel here because they stretch less elastically and dissipate energy internally. When a gust hits old sailcloth, the force spreads across the weave and fibres without snapping back violently. Now, nylon behaves quite differently. It stretches significantly under load, and then, it rebounds. In storms, this elasticity actually becomes destructive. Repeated stretching causes fibre fatigue, seam creep, and eventually tearing, often at stress points like grommets or stitched edges. Old sailcloth, being a good deal stiffer, reduces this kind of oscillation and helps preserve structural integrity. Why is water absorption actually an advantage, not a flaw? One of the most misunderstood qualities of old sailcloth is, honestly, its tendency to absorb water. Modern thinking often treats water absorption as a weakness, but in reality, it's actually part of the design. When flax or hemp canvas gets wet, the fibres swell up. This swelling tightens the weave, which in turn reduces airflow through the fabric and lowers flutter. Less flutter? Well, it means less shock loading, less noise, and less cumulative damage over time. Nylon repels water, which, sounds beneficial at first, until sustained wind forces it to flap violently. Now, when old sailcloth gets soaked with water, it definitely becomes heavier, but, it also gets a lot more stable. Honestly, in a real storm, stability is way more important than just saving a bit of weight. So, why does abrasion resistance decide whether a sail survives a proper storm? Well, storms aren't just about wind, right? There's constant chafing against the rigging, spars, deck edges, and even bits of debris flying about. It's a rough business, no doubt. So, natural sailcloth fibres are, a bit thicker and tougher when you look at them up close. They tend to resist abrasion by fraying slowly, rather than just failing all of a sudden. When old canvas starts to wear, it actually gives you a bit of a warning, announcing the damage well before any sort of catastrophic failure happens. Now, nylon fibres, they're smooth and strong, but once abrasion gets to them, failure can, propagate really quickly. A small tear in nylon often expands under load, whereas canvas tears tend to blunt and stabilise unless, they're actively worsened. Why seam behaviour separates old sailcloth from modern fabrics is quite interesting. Traditional sailcloth was sewn with heavy thread, often waxed, using wide seam allowances. The cloth itself provided friction against stitches, reducing slippage, which is actually quite important. When stressed, seams and cloth work together. Modern nylon sails rely on precision stitching and lighter thread. Under repeated wet-dry cycles and heavy loads, stitches can elongate holes in the fabric. Once that happens, seams lose strength quickly. Old sailcloth resists this because the fibres compress around thread rather than tearing away from it. Why old sailcloth ages more gracefully than nylon? Time is a storm multiplier. Sunlight, salt and repeated wetting degrade nylon chemically. Now, UV exposure. It actually weakens polymer chains, even when the fabric might look perfectly intact to the naked eye. Natural fibres, they also degrade, but usually at a slower and more predictable rate, especially if they've been treated with those traditional oils, tars or waxes. Historically, sails were routinely maintained with special coatings that helped reduce rot and UV damage, all while preserving the flexibility of the fabric. This maintenance culture really extended the service life of sails in a dramatic way. These days, modern nylon is often just treated as disposable once its performance drops. It's not usually repaired or preserved, which is quite a shift from the old ways. So, how can modern users apply those old sailcloth principles today? Well, for anyone preparing for harsh weather, maritime work, or even off-grid living, the lesson isn't to abandon modern materials entirely. It's more about choosing wisely and, learning from the past. You know, heavy canvas tarps really do outperform nylon covers during those long storms. Canvas shelters tend to stay quieter, feel warmer, and they're just a lot more stable when the wind really picks up. Waxed or oiled canvas, well, it actually mimics the way sails were treated in the past, and it can really increase the lifespan of your canvas by quite a bit. When you're rigging shelters or windbreaks, you want to keep the tension moderate, not tight. The old sailmakers, they always let the cloth settle under load, instead of forcing it to be rigid. So this principle actually reduces tearing, regardless of the material you're working with. You know, storms have a way of revealing truths that calm conditions tend to hide. In fair weather, nylon really does look superior. It's light, flexible and, well, easy to pack. But in real storms, the priorities, they sort of reverse. Control, predictability and gradual failure, those become far more important than just weight, honestly. Old sailcloth was engineered for those moments when failure meant death, not inconvenience. That is why, you know, fragments of centuries-old sails still exist in museums, while modern synthetics rarely survive even a fraction of that time under similar conditions. The material was not outdated. The expectations were higher. Old sailcloth endures because it was designed by people who truly understood that storms do not care about innovation, branding or convenience. They respond only to physics, experience and, well, respect for force. If uncovering the forgotten logic behind historical materials matters to you, then Relic Logic is the place where those lessons stay alive. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into technologies shaped by survival rather than marketing. And share this episode with anyone who believes that real storms still reward old wisdom.